Is this not simpler? Is this not your natural state? It is the unspoken truth of humanity that you crave well-written characters. The bright lure of character development diminishes your life's joy in a mad scramble for three-dimensional characters and emotional moments. You were made to be moved, but in the end, Disney always fails. Hey guys, and welcome to Staying in Character with Thomas. Today we're going to be discussing the Loki show and how it failed to deliver on a good three-dimensional, well-written character. Loki in the old Marvel is one of my all-time favorite characters and definitely my favorite villain. However, they kind of ruined him in the Loki show. And while this episode is focusing more on what they did wrong, it would be hard to do that without discussing what they did right before. So let's start with the positive. Like most things, it starts great and ends horribly. Now, in the beginning, we see Loki as a scrawny little boy in contention with his brother, vying for his father's favoritism and approval. And so that immediately connects us to him, because I think a lot of us can connect to that. I can't, because my parents truly just don't have favorites, and I have really healthy parents, and Odin was kind of toxic.
All my friends are toxic.
But there are a lot of us who could connect to Loki immediately because of that, and it was beautiful. And so the first Thor movie, he rigs the system, he doesn't hire, but gets the ice giants to almost kill Odin simply so he could rescue him to receive his father's approval.
I could have done it, Father!
And then when Odin says that he's not proud of him,
No, Loki.
it crushes him and he dies. That's also one of my favorite things they did with Loki. He died like 500 times and then came back. It's so fun. That was good, but he was purely evil. Very self-centered and evil. Next movie is the first Avengers. Also, very evil. I mean, he tried to take over Earth by killing a lot of people. It's not the warmest thing to do. You know, I'm Southern, and in the South, we usually bring a meal when we're visiting out of town. We try not to shoot people, but Loki just went that way. Maybe it's a northern thing, I don't know. Anyways, still evil and kind of unredeemably so, but we get a clear picture of his character. He's just this broken, sad little boy vying for his father's approval. So in the next movie we see him in Thor Dark World, which was decent. Not my favorite of the Thors. We see Loki start to become softer. He starts making morally good choices. The biggest moment we see this is when he saves, or rather, steps in front of Thor's girlfriend. Forget her name at the moment, because she had no character. Anyways, steps in front of her to save her. That is not a Loki thing to do. A Loki thing to do would be create a duplicate and run. Right? And that would have been fun. That would have been enjoyable. Very on character. But he steps in front of the one person that his brother cares most about. His brother who he has hated forever. Interesting, right? So now we're starting to see character development. And here's the thing you need to know about character development, is it does not happen overnight. There is no monumental moment that automatically changes a character. Character development happens over a long progression of time. And it's obviously easier to do this with a protagonist, but with a villain or antagonist character like Loki, you can still do it. And it can work really well. And it did in the old movies. So anyways, Thor Dark World. We're starting to see a softer Loki. Next time we see him, Thor Ragnarok. Now, in Thor Ragnarok, it was more of a lighthearted comedy of a movie, which kind of went offbeat from the other Thor movies, but it was enjoyable. I liked it. We start to see even more of Loki's softness. He can't quite break his villainous streak because it's just so ingrained in him. And I mean, he's the god of mischief. What you gonna do? Mischief gonna mischief. But he's starting to be softer, and by the end of the movie, he's kind of committed to being somewhat good and trying to fit in with the help of his brother, which is another interesting thing. Loki is very self-sufficient, self-oriented, doesn't need anyone. But he asks for help and is putting himself under the leadership of his brother to try and fit in. It's very great. Next time we see him is in Infinity War, where Thanos, kind of not great. But again, we see Loki has come full circle. He's using his evil, mischievous powers for good to try and save his brother and what is left of Asgard, which is not a lot. But he fails because Thanos outsmarted him or saw through the illusion, and it's not really clear how he knew. Maybe he just reacted fast. Whatever. And he dies. And that is sometimes the greatest end to a good character development, is that the character, dies. It's a good way to end it. In some cases, not always. Be careful of using cliches. Cliches go bad very quickly. But in some cases, it works really well to just kill off a character. So you may be thinking, well, if Loki's such a great, well-rounded, well-made character, how could they possibly have ruined him in the Loki show? And I think we all wondered that. None of us thought you could ruin Loki, but they did.
Come on. What did you expect?
It was an amazing feat. They deserve an award for ruining Loki. No one gives them an award. In the Loki show, it starts off with Loki teleporting out of the Battle of New York into a desert.
I beg your pardon.
So let's review which Loki we're looking at. Because this isn't Infinity War Loki, or Ragnarok Loki, or even Dark World Loki. This is Loki from New York. He had just come from hearing his father say, "I don't really love you." And then he spent some time with some, edgy, dark, emo aliens. It's never a good choice to hang out with emo kids. Loki did it. Not good. He's kind of a murdering psychopath, if you will, trying to take over Earth. We have not hit his character development yet. We're still just getting used to the bad Loki. So this is the Loki we're at. Very hurt and broken and self-focused. Right? It's a good character. And so he falls into a desert. The TVA kidnaps him, brings him to their facility, and, he watches a few videos, gets acquainted with the place, meets Owen Wilson, which I gotta say, wow.
Wow.
Wow. Wow.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Anyways, after that, they lock him in this room. He's put in timeout, like all good toddlers should be put in timeout. And then he watches the MCU. I mean, technically, it's his moments in the MCU, but that's what he does. He watches the MCU. All the movies that he's been in, all the moments. And then the final scene he sees is him dying. And in that monumental moment, he cries for a second, more inside than outside. But he cries, he feels really bad, and decides he wants to be a good person. Alright, can anybody tell me what went wrong there? Do you remember what I said earlier in the video? There is no such thing as a monumental moment that changes a character. It just doesn't happen, people. But they did it with Loki. And let's look at Loki's character as we are here. This is the New York Loki, where he's very self-centered and evil. If that Loki watched the MCU, saw the character development, and realized he died because he acted in the interest of other people, and not in the interest of himself, he would have responded something like this. That Loki is weak. I would never be as pathetic as that creature. And then he would respond by pretending to be sad, stabbing Owen Wilson, and breaking free from the TVA, causing mass chaos, which would have been fantastic. They didn't do that. Because Disney does not know how to write characters. They believe that the protagonist, main character, must be a morally good person, or at least on their way to being morally good, which is not true. A protagonist is just the main character. The Godfather, their protagonist, is not morally good in any sense of that word. Maybe he starts out that way, but he is decidedly not. The protagonist is simply the main character, and the antagonist is simply the opposite of the protagonist. So if the protagonist believes killing people is fun and good, the antagonist is someone who believes saving people is the best option. Right? That sounds weird. Antagonist, you think of villain. Protagonist, you think of hero character. But that's not what it is in writing. In story writing, the protagonist is simply the main character, so he can be good or bad, and the antagonist is simply the person that defies the protagonist. So Loki could totally have been a very villainous protagonist, and it would have worked great, and it would have fit with his character. And then they could have still done some slow character development, and they actually had a lot of potential to do that. But instead of having slow and educated character development, they have him fall in love with himself. There's a level of narcissism that few can aspire to be at. And I don't think it was in Loki's character because, granted, everyone's a little narcissistic, but Loki is not that much, he's not that level of narcissistic. He's self-centered, but it's all to protect himself. He's not obsessed with himself. It's protecting his hurt. He has a lot of trauma and pain, and that's where his self-centered and I'm only looking out for myself comes from. It's not a love of himself. It's a protection. So for him to fall in love with himself is out of character. Especially because the version of himself that he fell in love with, Sylvia, something like that, she doesn't need protecting. She's in a lot of ways emotionally and power-wise superior to he is, which means that he wouldn't even see the I need to protect myself in himself through Sylvia. So none of that was in character. Also weird. What I would think would be the better option is if he had watched the MCU and gone, pathetic. And then he's trying to fight Owen Wilson and the TVA break out, and then he learns that it would be better in his self-interest if he goes along with their scheme and tracks down Sylvie. Sylvie, that's it. It's not Sylvia, it's Sylvie. So he tracks her down. And then Sylvie's like, yo, you want to come with me? And he'd be like, yeah, I do. And so they escape. Poof, into nowhere. TVA has to find them. TVA would be the antagonist. The antagonist would be Owen Wilson there. Not Kang, who just randomly shows up at the end for... Okay. They could still totally have Kang, but Kang shouldn't be put on the pedestal of this is the antagonist. The antagonist should have been Owen Wilson. Anyways, so Loki should have been communicating and hanging out with Sylvie and then the other Lokis. I like how they brought in a bunch of other Lokis. And the character development should have slowly come as he saw how messed up Sylvie is and how messed up the other Lokis are, and starts to see himself in them, because often, and even in real life, Seeing someone who's like us but have taken a bad path can inspire a lot of change, I find. So if he were to see Sylvie, as much of himself in there as possible, and then see how utterly broken she is, I think that would have triggered some good character development and changed him. So by the end of the series, I don't think they could have pulled off full circle character development, but by the end of the series, he should be making some morally good choices and questioning whether this whole villainy thing is what up to snuff, as our British friends say. I think that would have been nice, because with character development, you want to show the internal dilemma. You want to have the old self fighting the new self. Much like Christianity, when you become saved, you still have your flesh in you, the sinful desires of the heart and such. But because you are saved, the Holy Spirit is also working in you to perfect you and make you more holy. It's a beautiful thing. Character development is often like that. You need to see the old self desiring to stay the old self, because it's all it knows and it's comfortable. You're comfortable with how you are. That's why it takes forever to become a better person and to establish good habits. And then as we're seeing that fight to stay how we are, we ask questions. That's another important thing about character development, is it's not a decision, it's questions. So for Loki, it'd be, Sylvie's in trouble. I could run, and I have perfect opportunity to run. But what if I duplicate myself and help her run too? And then he tries that, and it works. And he gets warm fuzzies inside. He likes that. And slowly, he begins to ask more questions and make more choices based off of those questions. And also with character development, you need to see some backsliding. It's not a perfect spiral of good. And I think it's more human to see failures, and we connect to the character and they become more three-dimensional if they have flaws and failures. So when writing character development, the best way to show failures are flaws from the old self. You will always have flaws, even when you become Captain America, who is like the icon of morally good, perfect people. You're still going to have flaws. But in making character development, the flaws that need to be focused on are the flaws of the old self. So Loki's flaws: self-centeredness, lying, murderousness. That's a big one. There are many flaws that he possesses, but those are kind of the big ones. So we need to see those flaws come out that counter his good decisions. And of course I'm using Loki, but this can be applied to any character whatsoever, because it's how character development works. So backsliding. So maybe we have a moment where, let's go back to saving Sylvie. He could save Sylvie, but instead he runs because he gets scared. Say, oh no, I'm going to get hurt. Owen Wilson's going to get me. I'm going to have to be in the next Shanghai movie. Scary. Don't want to do that. Getting back on the train of thought. And he runs. He jumps through a portal or duplicates himself and distracts and then gets gone. And Sylvie gets kidnapped. Or, depending on how dark you want to go, Sylvie gets killed. Then he's backslidden. Is that a word? He backslided. Somehow that seems like less of a word. Anyways, he messed up. He screwed this up. And so now we see internal dialogue and dilemma. It's easier to do in a book because you can just write, he starts thinking this. In a movie or show, you can't really do, you can, but it's really weird. So you need to physicalize it. Maybe he gets to his hiding place and he's safe and he's relaxing and he starts crying. Or he starts pacing and saying out loud what he did wrong. And then that's your decision moments. Character development happens in questions, but after backsliding, then decisions are made. So he doesn't ask the question, should I have saved Sylvie? He already knows this because he's becoming a morally good person. He knows he should have saved her. Now he makes a decision. I'm not going to run anymore. I'm going to go rescue Sylvie. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. And that is what I believe should happen. And so then he stops his goals. He sacrifices his own personal goals to rescue Sylvie. And you have a few episode montage or something where he rescues Sylvie. That would be great. And that's how character development works. It's asking questions, it's backsliding, and then making decisions after the backsliding. And you rinse and repeat until the amount of times you make the right decision, right or wrong. I mean, it depends on which way you're developing the character. You can have negative character development where they become villains, and so I suppose the right decision would be the morally wrong decision. But anyways, where the new decisions outnumber the old decisions. The decisions of the old self come up sometimes because we don't want to forget where we came from. But the new self decisions are way more frequent. That's when character development has come for a full circle. Now, sometimes it always looks different because it's specific to the character. So like I said towards the beginning, sometimes full circle character development looks like the character dying. And it can be they die in a way that mimics a scene where they made a bad decision. It can be in a self-sacrificial way, but it doesn't have to be. A full circle character development usually ends with some form of sacrifice. It can be moral sacrifice, it can be self-sacrifice, it can be death, it can be losing something you loved, like in Up. The beloved cartoon Up, about the bird, the cranky old man, and the Boy Scout. The full circle of the character development of the old man, and I apologize for forgetting the name, is that he lets go of all of his stuff. He had been holding on to all of his stuff because his grief had tied him down to it. Like, imagine there were strings on all of his stuff and they were all tied around him. But his character development was that he cut the strings and let go of everything that had been keeping him semi-emotionally stable. He made a huge sacrifice, but it displayed to us that his new self was more powerful than his old self, thereby showing that his character development was complete. Beautiful moment. Character development always ends with sacrifice. And in the Loki series, we never got to the sacrifice. He sacrificed nothing. He gained nothing. He learned nothing. He made no decisions. He didn't question anything. He saw the MCU, cried about it, and then decided to help Owen Wilson. And then his freaky girlfriend, who is himself, which is weird and disgusting. The concept is weird and disgusting. Sylvie was interesting enough character. It left him because she has trauma. That's another thing. Other characters' development can help other characters develop, so Loki could have helped Sylvie and vice versa. But sometimes it's more interesting to have a character that has a lot of the same flaws as the protagonist, but never develops. Which I think is what they should have done, which is what they kind of did, but that's just because neither character had any kind of character development. They were all one-dimensional characters with fun one-liners and cool green magic. Three-dimensional characters have character development and flaws. That's really what makes a three-dimensional character. Loki in the Loki show was one-dimensional. He made no complicated choices. He did not struggle. He made no sacrifices. And his flaws only came up when his girlfriend wanted to break up with him because they both had trauma, which granted, trauma is very interesting, very valid, great to see. but only when it's done well. If you're just like, I have trauma, so I'm going to make a bad decision, that's stupid and not well written and not really honoring to the trauma, if you will, which is annoying. They could have explored the trauma on both sides, but they didn't. And like I said, the guy they made the main antagonist, Kane, had no involvement in the story until the end, where they're like, look, I did this, aren't I super cool? No, because we don't know you. We don't care about you. A better antagonist would have been Owen Wilson, because Owen Wilson countered Loki, or Loki as he should have been, in every way. So even though Owen Wilson was a morally good person, I mean, I guess that depends on how you look at it, but he was the counter to how Loki should have been in every way. Owen Wilson should have been the antagonist, and Loki should have been a villain. They could have done character development, but they also didn't need it. They could have made a three-dimensional character that was very villainous. If you guys want, leave in the comments, and I can do a video on three-dimensional villains, because those are way harder. So let's sum up. I like summaries, because it means I can skip to the end of the video and learn everything without having to watch some idiot on screen ramble on for a while, which I obviously didn't do, right? What makes good character development? Good character development comes from a broken old self, questions about possibilities of a new self, positive payoff from making good choice that makes them want to make more good choices, backsliding, so going back to the old self, making a less than preferable decision, making a decision only after the backsliding, payoff for making the right decision. And that payoff does not have to look like, a Vegas reward. You can put them in a horrible position, because often the right decision is also the pragmatically stupid decision. So put them in bad situations, but see the mental, emotional payoff of the good thing that they did. And then it ends with some form of sacrifice. That's how we see it's come full circle. Granted, there are specific cases where you can see character development without sacrifice, but it is near impossible. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you will go and watch the rest of the Smokey Squadcast and leave in the comments, what video do you want me to do next? What advice or tips do you have for me to make my videos better? And what did you think about the Loki show? And did I miss anything when I was talking about character development? Is there any tips I left out? Please leave them in the comments, because I'm still learning myself.
There